All right, so what we're looking at right now is a pumpkin that Gina and I made a couple years ago, and we had covered it with plaster and then decided to hard coat it with the mortar that we've used in the past for like tombstones and rock walls, that kind of thing. I have chipped all that off of this pumpkin because we no longer need this. We made a mold, and we can replicate this size pumpkin with fiberglass now. So now I have the foam free, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to carve this down so that I create an heirloom style pumpkin. I want something that's a little bit shorter and just more of that heirloomy look. This is the stem that came off the top. I'm probably going to rework this as well, or make a new one. It's going to be probably too big for this pumpkin once I carve it down. But for the tools, I'm going to be using saws and sandpaper. I've got this nail brush that I made, and then I've got these horse brushes that work really well. But like I said, the first thing I'm going to do is just start taking this down. I'm probably going to end up cutting this thing down quite a bit to shorten it, because I don't want it as tall. I want it to be a lot narrower. One of the first steps I forgot to mention that I wanted to do is I plugged in our hot wire cutter, and I went ahead and just lopped off the top of this thing just to shorten it up, because that's the look we're going for. And then the second thing is I started to dig into the middle, and you can kind of see like this one's going to be a lot more drastic than the pumpkins we've made in the past. So now that I have the top cut off here, I'm going to go ahead and do the same in here, just dig down and then start shaping this. And I'm kind of using the outside of the old pumpkin to kind of as a guideline, but I will probably dig some of these in the middle too, so that you have a lot more of those pumpkin sides. I started using the handsaw, and I was like, man, what am I doing all this work for? Got a hot wire cutter. That makes it a little quicker and easier on the old biceps. All right, so here is the progress so far. I've started digging quite a bit down. I've got all the little side pieces. It's starting to look a little more heirloomy. Here's the bottom. I'm not going in as deep as I am on the top. Now the dilemma that we're having is because it is the old pumpkin, we've got kind of a rectangular thing going on. It's shorter this direction and longer this direction. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start actually taking in a little bit from both sides, just to I don't want it to be square, but at the same time it just looks a little long to us right now. So it's not that big a deal, but if I can just bring that in just a little bit and create a more rounded look, I think that's gonna make us a little more happier. Okay, I got it to be a little bit more rounder. It's still kind of squarey looking from the top, but I think that it's about as good as it's gonna get, because the more that I seem to take off the sides, the more it still looks square or rectangular to me. So I'm gonna call this good as far as the outer shape. Now I may bring some of these edges in a little bit more, but the next step is, you can see these three are a lot smoother than the rest of them. It's because I've quit using the hairbrush and I've switched over to 80 grit sandpaper, and I'm kind of just shaping it along the outsides. I'm also using a round file to get the inside edge, and some other files to do some shaping. But I'm gonna start making this thing look a little more pretty. Once I get all that done, then I think what I'm gonna do is use some great stuff and fill in some of these cracks where the two pieces got glued together. But it's starting to look a little more heirloomy. I don't think an heirloom pumpkin's really scary, but I'm making it scary sounding. Woo! Okay, so I'm pretty much done with sanding. Like I said before, I started out with an 80 grit, and then I switched to 120. You could even do a finer grit to give it a smoother finish. I'm planning on covering this thing with some drywall mud just to kind of smooth it out and fill some of these little pits and stuff. But speaking of filling in pits, I've got a lot of larger grooves and stuff for where the foam was glued together. like especially all these cracks. Let's see, some of the cracks you can see are large, especially that one right there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my great stuff here. I've got it on a really low setting so I can have more control filling in all these cracks. So that's going to be the next thing that I do. And then once that great stuff cures, I'll carve it down. Like this is the bottom. I'll probably fill a little bit of great stuff right here so I can make a little end there. And then the top, I've got to still carve a stem. I got a couple ideas. I think I'm going to take the older stem and just carve it down a little bit uneven. Like Gina came out and we talked about it and decided to leave some of them a little bigger than the others. That way it kind of had that heirloomy look. A lot of you guys ask where we get our big foam. These are actually just scrap pieces that we had from another project. There's a couple foam distributors here in Los Angeles that we get them from. But one of the things that you can definitely do is get the size foam that you have and just glue multiple layers together. Like this one, for example, you can see the big piece up here, and then we had just glued smaller pieces together down here, and I didn't do a really good job getting them super tight. But it doesn't really matter when it's all covered. So I got a little crazy with the great stuff, but you can see I filled in all the cracks. Next thing to do is to shave this down. You can use a Dremel with like a little drum sander, or you know, just some type of little sander will make it a little easier than. You could also use a sanding block or something. A lot of this stuff, if you're not careful, will just chip out. So that's why I tend to use a Dremel, just to get the worst of it. But yeah, there you go. I'm going to start sanding. And then after that, I'm going to start working on the stem. So once I finished the sanding on the stem, I went and got some scrap paint that we had left over from another job and just quickly did a coat of this. That way I could see a little easier where I need to go through and fill in with my drywall mud. So I've started to smear that on, and then once this gets completely coated and dried, then I'll go over with a fine grit sandpaper like a 220. And then I may go over it again with another coat of paint. And then this thing should be ready for molding. I've also started a couple other pumpkins. This one is similar to the one I just showed you right there, but this one is a little more perfectly round. As you can see, this one's a little more skinnier and taller. I still have to go through and finish filling in all these cracks with some great stuff, and then take a Dremel and clean up the stem and any of the places that I missed, and then do the same thing with this, cover the pits with drywall mud and paint it, and then that'll be ready for molding too. We should basically have 4 more pumpkins, probably 8 different styles total. Once we have the molds all made for all these, then we can go through and have fun maybe carving some jack-o'-lanterns out of some of these guys. Here's a couple of the molds that we've already made a couple pumpkins from. You can see that they break up in several different spots. What we do is we split them in half, and then we go over it with a couple layers of gel coat, and then 4 to 6 ounces of fiberglass. Once the fiberglass cures, we pop the 2 halves out. We cut off all the fibery edges, get the 2 sides cleaned up. We bond the 2 edges together with fiberglass, and then go do a light sand and Bondo and prep everything, getting it ready for primer. If I get any of these little air bubbles in the fiberglass, I just chip around the edges and then do a light sand. Just mix up a little bit of Bondo to fill that hole. Make it kind of go around that opening there, and then scrape off any excess. So there's less sanding to do.
I'm getting ready to do the stems, and I had originally painted it all cream color, but as you can see there was a bunch of overspray from the airbrush. So I went ahead and just went back with some cream to get rid of the orange, and now I'm going to go in with a dark brown, and I'm just going to do the whole bottom, and then I'm going to go in each one of these cracks right here. Now the brown is done, I went ahead and filled in all of these deep crevices right here. This is all dark. It's really nice line around here. As you can tell, it's got a good edge to it. And it looks messy, but it's gonna look good in a second. All right, so I mixed up some green, and now I'm going to just lightly add some to the stem. Then once you do the green, you just keep going back over it between brown and cream, and you get it the way that you like it. There really is no particular method other than I like to leave it a little bit darker at the base and then have it go up. And then I do like to shade right around the edge right here. I think it highlights it pretty nicely. And you just get it until you like it, and then you keep standing back and coming forward and standing back and coming forward. Like right now I can already tell I'm gonna have to lighten that up a little bit because I don't like that. This side looks good all blended, but this side's a little too dark still. So I'll go ahead and change that, and yeah, that's how you do a stem. On to clear coat. I've already applied 2 coats to the top, so now I just need to do 1 more coat on the bottom, and then this big boy is done. And then I just have the bottom to do there. And super easy. You just dip your paintbrush and do a thin layer, and then it's coated real good.
Where are you?
Where's Harrison? Oh boy, there goes! Go!
Keep going, and I'll give you 2 M&Ms. Yeah, keep going.
The more you roll it, the more M&Ms will give you.
Do 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 da 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 da. Now we gotta carve it. Are you ready to carve this thing?